Okay, chat. I need to make a cringe YouTuber intro, I think. I played the Arknights Endfield Beta for an entire month every day. So cringe. No, it's horrible. I'm not using that. Okay, so yes, I mean, clearly, as obvious, this is recorded live on stream. If you care to join, then surprise, I stream here on YouTube and also on Twitch, so, you know, you can watch wherever you want. Cool. But yeah, so pretty much, I think what we're gonna do, go over my thoughts, my feedback, what I think of all the parts of the game. So we'll go through, probably start with some overall thoughts, and then go into, like, combat, the factory stuff, exploration, visuals and sound, and then the story as well. Then just end with like some closing remarks, I guess. I'm still gonna be reading chat. This is gonna be horrible. You won't even know what's going on. Maybe I should leave chat on so they don't look like an absolute schizoid as I'm reading out a chat message. So yeah, okay. Overall thoughts for just the beta in general. What do I think? It's like an 8 out of 10 is kind of what I'd put it as, like an 8 out of 10. So, I mean, first of all, yes, the game is good. Frankly, quite impressive with just how much game there is for a first beta. Obviously, there was a tech test a year ago, but that thing was like that thing truly was an alpha, which has never been more clear than now with this first beta. Because it's for the first 2 weeks. I've seen multiple people say this, and I agree. For like the first 2 weeks of the beta, it did not feel like I was playing the beta for like a live service gacha game. It felt like I was playing just an RPG, which I guess kind of happened to have like a gacha system in it, but I barely even considered it. I was playing an RPG that was just like a game, and I could just play it as much as I want and do what I wanted. It was just like a team combat factory building RPG that I was just playing, as if I bought like a $30 to $40 game, which was very silly. I kept forgetting I was playing a gacha game, which obviously, let's get real for a moment. Part of that reason is because the stamina and also gacha money experience is going to be very different in the beta because all of that is accelerated. You're getting more rolls than you probably will on the full game, and you're getting more stamina than you will at the full game release. So your progression speed is a little different in a beta than in the full game. So obviously that's probably going to feel different for the full game. So let's, keep that in mind. I mean, let's keep that in mind in general for everything, that it is a beta and some things are affected quite significantly by it being a beta rather than the full release. That's like the disclaimer for this whole thing, is that yes, it's still a beta. It says it down there in the bottom right of the screen. It is still a beta. It is it's in development. But still, it's incredibly, quite impressive for just how much game there is for a beta. And like almost all of it is also like good. Which is just like, I mean, damn. They kind of cooked. I was a little worried with, with what the tech test looked like. I was kind of worried. I was like, how are they gonna like pull this back or something? Jesus Christ, they sure did. Because also the level of polish for a beta is also pretty silly. The amount of polish that the Endfield beta has for a first beta as well, most likely we are not releasing for another half a year or something. Because the rumors are like August or something. But it's already as polished as it is for, the parts of the content that we have, from the visuals to how it feels, to how everything looks, how everything sounds, how everything plays. It's just like all the issues that you find are like kind of small things. You don't run into parts or these kind of walls or anything where it's like, holy moly, this feels incredibly half done or like clearly still in development. In the later parts of the beta, once you get sort of the end game of the beta, you clearly run into stuff that is still like early in development. But for like the first 2 weeks, you just don't run into anything that really feels like it's like very clearly beta content, like any big things. You run into small things like, oh, that looks a little unfinished, or oh, that felt a little awkward, or like maybe it shouldn't be like that. So overall, it's just incredibly impressive for a beta. I mean, I feel like the best way to describe it, I was supposed to attack, sorry Gilby. The best way to describe just the early, especially the early game of the beta, is that it just doesn't feel like you're even playing a gacha game. It feels like you're playing a $30 to $40 game, and it's just there. Okay, so I guess next up we could then talk about the combat, which is obviously a pretty big part of the game. For the people who aren't factory obsessed, the combat is obviously the main part of the game, isn't it? Overall combat, it feels good. Like, so the main thing with the combat, there's a couple things with the combat, which is, first of all, it takes a little bit to open up. They'll probably keep this, I'd assume they keep this in the full game, but you don't actually unlock like even your full team. You don't actually unlock your full team, like 4 people, until like a couple hours into the game, actually. You run around with 2 people first, and then you run around with 3 for a little bit, and then you get a 4th eventually, like a couple hours into the game or something. But obviously you need like the full 4-person team to really have the combat open up. But once you do have the 4-person team, it does indeed open up. But there's some things which just kind of don't click right away, and the game could maybe do a somewhat better job of kind of guiding you into. They do kind of do it, but not sort of maybe directly enough, because for the combat, it really just doesn't open up until you actually figure out somewhat the team synergies and synergies to make the combat actually flow in a way that feels good. If you just kind of throw in characters that you like the look of, without reading what they do, without at all thinking how they work together, which, warning, might require some reading. I know Ian can't read, but it might require some reading. But once you do that, once you figure it out, at least somewhat, like maybe you find at least one team where it kind of flows together nicely and you like, the combat really does, like, it starts clicking and starts feeling good. You wanna come over here so I can hit you with these Avivena? Ow, ow. He fucking died mid-air. No fucking way. Sheesh. Dude, however, did you see those combos on that second phase? Dude, I was comboing like crazy, but then he tripped and died. When you're using your skills and you're like paying attention to what skills you're using and when, so that you have enough skill points for them. You're actually triggering your combo attacks in like a sort of a good order and at the right times, and you're saving your ultimates or saving your skills for the right times and responding to things also, you know, just live and kind of figuring out a rotation for your team. Then it starts feeling good. Surprise. But another thing that I think we talked about on stream pretty early on already, we talked about it on stream. If you're just watching the combat, most of it really doesn't look very special, or like that much is happening, or it doesn't look that exciting. You don't really see as much what's happening on. You don't get a sense of how the combat feels very well from just watching it. And you're maybe not aware of just how much of that stuff happening is actually directly controlled and planned by the person making the inputs, the player. You kind of have to actually be there playing it and controlling it for it to feel like it's like clicking. And another thing is also that, yes, early on you are kind of missing some utilities and stuff, because it kind of ties into the factory stuff and whatnot, but gear matters a decent amount. So yes, there's gear for the combat, but the gear isn't RNG. Getting the gear is tied to the factory gameplay, and you need to unlock higher tier gear, and the higher tier gear can really make some teams and some characters function significantly better and feel much better than like no gear or just like lower level gear. So that also is unlocking gear, and then obviously also leveling up your characters and unlocking their passives and everything, because some of the passives for characters also can be quite significant for how they function and how it feels to play them, and how they, more importantly, how they fit into an actual team. In chat, how much thought do you put into moment-to-moment combat? I mean, it really depends on... That varies. The amount of thought you actually put moment-to-moment varies per fight, and also per what kind of team you're using. Some teams are quite sort of lazy. Like this team actually right here, pretty lazy to use. You kind of have like a couple things you do and it just kind of clears stuff. It's a very strong sort of, you don't have to be putting a huge amount of thought in, a little bit, but not a massive. But then some other teams, you're kind of constantly keeping an eye out for what the enemy is doing, what do you have on cooldown, how much skill points do you have, can I use this skill now or should I use it later, where is the enemy, can I kite these enemies closer to each other. It really depends. It depends heavily on team, and that is actually the one thing for the combat right now, which is this is very much a beta thing, is that obviously there's a lack of variety. You kind of have like a couple of teams that are sort of feel like fully functional teams, but that's just a case of character variety and sort of essentially build variety in that sense, because it's a beta. We only have 14 characters and like a certain amount of different like gear and bonuses and stuff. Low skill 4 but high ceiling, pretty much, yeah, because you can, to some extent, you can just unga bunga. You can just run around waiting for skill points and kind of unga bunga, but you're just not gonna have a fun time, honestly. That's the thing, is like, if you kind of, it very much, I feel like if you don't sort of find some teams that you like to, that feels good for you to play, and that does sort of flow together well, the combat just ends up being kind of not that fun. Because the combat enjoyment and sort of combat puzzle is very much focused around team synergies and character synergies. So then if you don't really have any synergies, it's gonna feel very lackluster. The combat does have a couple like current flaws in it. There's some like small flaws. Well, I mean, some bigger, some smaller. But none of the flaws are like problems where they can be fixed quite easily, I feel. Like, there's a couple issues with just like some of the basic combat mechanics, but they're like quite easily fixable. They're not like fundamental flaws that would require a redesign of the combat. They just need to tweak how some stuff works, how some stuff interacts with other things, and that will sort of solve a lot of those issues. And also, they seem to be aware of a lot of them already, because as we were going through a bunch of the feedback surveys, side note, there's a lot of feedback surveys and they take quite a while to fill out. They were very thorough. It was like being interrogated by the CIA at times. But in those feedback surveys, very often, something that we had talked about on stream directly came up in the feedback survey. Hey, was this exact thing that you complained about like an hour ago, is this an issue? And you'd be, actually, yes, it was an issue. You knew, huh? So for some of the stuff, they seem to be quite aware that it is an issue. So even for that, I'm kind of not worried. Like, I think that's the main thing, is that for like 90% of what the beta has shown, I'm either just like, this is just great, or if there is some small issue, I'm pretty confident it will be solved, because it's something that's quite easily solved. And they seem to also be aware of. Factory and exploration kind of go hand to hand, because obviously some of the exploration is tied to factory stuff. And exploration isn't like, well, okay, let's shortly talk about exploration, because I don't think there's a huge amount to say about the exploration specifically. It's just kind of normal good. Like, I mean, first of all, I mean, everything kind of just looks very pretty. Like, it's just nice to run around in the world because stuff looks pretty and it functions well, and your character movements feel good. Your jumps feel good. Okay, sometimes the jumps can be a little awkward, but they also asked about those in the surveys, so like, exploration is just kind of normal good. There's no really any complaints about it. Like, I can't think of anything bad about it. But also, there's not anything like extraordinary about it. Like, I feel like if you've experienced sort of a 3D gacha like exploration, it is overall pretty similar. It's just a good, decent version of that, with some little extra bits, obviously, because of how it ties into the factory system, where you will be pulling your little relays, you'll be pulling your like power lines and zip lines and stuff across the map, which does add, you know, a unique sort of aspect and a unique dimension to the exploration, because you need power lines to solve some of the puzzles and stuff that you run into in the world. But I mean, main thing is The maps look nice. There's some like decent variety in the maps. They sort of have their own identity, for all the maps sort of feel unique enough. And we've sort of only seen like, we haven't even really seen a huge variety in sort of types of maps that we'll run into. Like we have kind of one area, which is this, and the related connected areas, and then like the second area, which is a little bit more different, like has a bigger difference because it's like a different country essentially. And also, yes, that's another thing, is that good point, chat. In like so not visual teasing, but otherwise a bunch of other like possible maps and like nations and stuff have been teased, and some of them sound extremely exciting. So there's like a desert area that's been teased, and then there's also like seemingly some kind of actual just straight up cyberpunk style city that has been teased, and I cannot wait for us to go there. That shit sounds insanely cool, especially with like the presentation and graphics and everything that so far the game has showed. So yeah, exploration is just like a normal good. It's good, but also since the maps, like one thing is that since the maps are not like massive, you don't have massive, huge maps. Because right, it is not an open world. It is not a fully open world. It is, what do you call it? Like semi-open world. You have multiple areas that are connected seamlessly. So these are connected seamlessly. You can just walk between these. You don't have to teleport to them or anything. There's no loading screen if you just walk to them. But they're separated into instances. So the maps also don't get like huge where it feels like, oh my god, I have like way too much to explore, because it's sort of packaged into multiple smaller areas that you can focus on. Like, oh, I'll focus on just like exploring this one map. There's some quality of life exploration things that are clearly not in the beta yet, but I would expect them to be there in the full game. Stuff like, you know, whatever, like, you know, essentially things like treasure compasses and stuff like that are not in the beta yet. I would expect something of those types to be in the full game, however, so. But okay, next up, we can then get into the factory portion. You've probably seen much more complicated factories. If you've been following the beta and people playing it at all, you've probably seen much bigger bases with much more complicated stuff. Mine is super basic, but that's fine. I've still played a fair bit of the factory. So yeah. The entire, like, essentially second half of the game, the factorio / satisfactory factory building aspect, which is just a straight up ass whole nother like game inside the game. You can use hours and hours on the factory gameplay, and it is not gated by like anything essentially. You do not have to wait to sort of do stuff. The only gates is your overall progression that you can unlock like higher tier materials. Otherwise, you can lose a lot of time on the factory. But don't get scared if you hate factory games, because I think overall they do a pretty good job of, well, frankly, they're almost a little bit too slow. But they introduce the factory stuff extremely gradually and slowly for the most part. They take their time to not scare people away because of the factory stuff, because they are aware that the factory stuff is for sure like the scariest part of the game for kind of the 3D gacha audience essentially. First of all, they have a whole bunch of tutorials, though I think the tutorials could be quite a bit better, frankly. I think the tutorials are not like best, but they have a huge amount of tutorials. They have tutorials for pretty much goddamn every tiny thing you could imagine. And they introduce it very slowly just in general. So you don't sort of have, you do not get overwhelmed by the factory sort of almost at any point. At least I haven't felt like overwhelmed by it at any point, but I'm not like a complete factory noob. But I have not played a factory game actually since, I think it was in middle school, the last time I played any kind of factory simulation stuff, and that wasn't even a full-ass factory game. That was the factory mods in Minecraft that I played. That's what I played. That's like the only factory simulation stuff I think I've played in my life. And I did not feel like overwhelmed or like terrified by the factory stuff. And indeed, there were multiple times where I got a little, I was like damn, I could do a little bit more factory though. Like, damn, I could do some factory. Like, it can be fun. It can be fun. It can even be fun. And the thing is, if you don't find the factory stuff fun at all, you can ignore it quite a lot. You don't really have to. There are very few things that you have to use the factory for. Like, you can find ways around stuff. There's like a couple of, you need it for a couple of things that are relevant to exploration. You need to like craft some bombs for exploration puzzles. You need to pull the, that's not even really related to the proper factory building, but you need to pull your power lines to places so that you can power certain puzzle mechanics or something. And then yes, you can put around zip lines so that you can get around, and that's not the zip line. You can put out zip lines so you can like get around faster and whatnot. However, the zip lines currently could be implemented better because the zip lines at this moment don't actually really enhance your exploration capabilities. Because you kind of have to do the exploring first so that you can plan out where to put your zip lines. The zip lines are much more so feel like they're useful for and used for just getting to like rare resource points again and more easily, so that you can like go retread your traces to certain points of the map where you have like rare resources or something. And one of the other things, so yes, small exploration stuff is one thing that factory is necessary for.
Weird. I prefer busying myself with a job or delivery.
Okay, Gilby. The other thing that factory very much is necessary for, if you're just someone who wants to just do combat stuff and like exploration stuff, is the gear. All of your character gear,
Come closer.
these things, these are all crafted through the factory system. You have to make factory stuff to be able to make the materials to craft your gear. So that is something that is like kind of forced upon you, if that's how you want to put it. You're kind of, with that you're forced to interact with the factory if you want to make gear, and you kind of need to make the gear. The gear is pretty darn important for your characters and your team. But the thing is that once you've set it up, once you take a little bit of time to set up your new upgraded production line for a better quality gear, it's not super complicated. It is not like overly complicated. Even for the highest tier gear material, it is not super complicated to make. And once you've made it once, it will just be there. And frankly, you can just make it. You can leave it running overnight, because that's the cool part with all the factory stuff. It is just always constantly running because it's an online game. So you can just set up your factory, set up your little production line for your gear, go to bed, and by the time that you log in the next day, you will probably have more than enough gear components to do almost goddamn anything. It's a lot of the factory you can play in a way where you set up a thing and you can then just leave it. You can leave it for quite a while and don't have to you can sort of set it and leave it. Set it and forget it. It'll just do its thing. And if you don't care, for example, if you don't like the factory that much, you can just sort of ignore like perfect production and perfect efficiency and stuff, and essentially go with the mindset of like, hey, it's good enough. It works. That's a lot what I've done. And also there is 100% going to just be like factory guides of like, hey, here's the setup for a good thing. Like here's your full setup for this thing, and just copy it. It's absolutely going to be a thing, 100%. Also, yeah, Chad is mentioning the outpost system and currency exchange, which is, I guess that is kind of that is one of the other main aspects of the factory. Is you unlock these outposts and whatnot when you produce some kind of factory item, and then you supply it to the outpost, and it happens automatically as long as you have enough of them in stock. And it gives you some convention certificates, and this is essentially sort of another just form of currency. And this currency right now you can use to buy some progression items, like materials, just like character level up materials and stuff. But also gifts. You can give to your operators so that they get a higher trust or affection level, because that is a mechanic in the game where characters have a trust stat. And you can speed up that process by giving them gifts. And yes, also Chad mentioning that you can progress these outposts as you supply more of the item that they want. You'll also get XP for the outpost, and then you can level up the outposts to unlock better areas. So that's how leveling up outposts actually is fairly important. You do kind of have to do it. This is another one that you kind of do have to do, because leveling up outposts is how you level up the essentially world level of your maps, so that you can get higher tier enemies and higher tier rewards and higher tier materials and like more materials. So that is another thing you do. You do kind of have to interact with the outposts to get your map level up. And so otherwise, I mean, overall for the factory, I like how the factory works. Factory heads, I do see wishing for like more complexity and stuff. For me personally, kind of where it is now feels pretty good. I'm not that knowledgeable on factory to really be able to see like what would be lacking and what would be like a good adjustment, because I'm just sort of not as knowledgeable or experienced with that kind of stuff. But indeed, so to me, who is fairly a noob for factory stuff, it feels fine. It's like, it's just sort of normal, enjoyable. You can enjoy it sort of mostly just to the amount that you do. You don't ever, I've never really felt super forced. Like, oh no, I have to do factory now. At the very least, if you don't care about like perfect production efficiency and whatnot. I have a lot of inefficiencies in everything I'm doing, because it's fine, it works. But yeah, so I think for me, the factory works pretty good. Like the factory doesn't feel disruptive to any other parts of the game. It feels like decently well integrated into what happens. So I think it works. Like it is one of those things like, how the hell is this gonna work for, you know, a game like this? But no, they've somehow done it. It kind of fits in pretty well, and you have a decent amount of freedom to adjust how much you actually interact with the factory stuff. So I wouldn't be very worried about it. I guess next up we could then go through sort of the, I guess, technical aspects, the graphics, what it looks like, what it sounds like. Very simply put, very good. Very good. Be it the environment, be it the lighting, be it the sound effects, be it the music, or be it the character models, the animations, their expressiveness, the detail, the textures. Everything is just very high quality. And also, because it's somewhat related to the audio and stuff and whatnot, the English dub, so I am generally speaking a person who for these games almost always plays Japanese dub, because it feels the most correct. And also I somewhat understand Japanese, I don't understand Chinese. But for Endfield, I've actually been playing the English dub, because it's like very good. And it feels somehow almost more appropriate than Japanese. Even though normally I heavily prefer the Japanese dubs. For some reason for this one, the English is just really good. They have a bunch of unique accents. Characters have like different accents. We have a whole bunch of different British accents. We have like Irish, we have Scottish, we have a whole bunch of just like random British accents. We have like Italian, we have Chinese and other like Asian accents. It's very nice. It's very cool. I love to see it. And chat also, yes, mentioned another good thing about the sort of audio stuff is kind of audio mixing for different areas and stuff, where if you're in a cave, you'll have like reverb as characters speak. The sound will like sort of echo slightly and so on. And also the ambient music, just the overall music when you're exploring and whatnot, it actually has like different versions for when you're just outside like this, and when you're inside of like a cave or a building or something. It will actually slightly change the music to sort of fit the location better. Okay, so here's just an example of what I actually mean with the music changing if you're like outside or in a cave. So this is the music outside. And then once we walk in here, it's still the same song, but it's just like a remixed version to fit sort of the closed off cave, which is just really nice. And yes, another thing that chat pointed out is that your stuff like your character's footsteps, you will have different footstep sounds for not only the material that they're walking on, but also depending on what their shoes are. Like for example, with Ember, especially if you're walking around on, like depending on what you're walking on, the sound is more metallic because she kind of has like these sort of more metallic-ish shoes. Snowshine's clunky boots as well, yes. And also, like, the sounds of your character's clothes rustling and everything. Obviously, Ember ends up having a bunch of kind of more clanky metallic sounds compared to something like, you know, Surtur's or Levitane's or Gilberta's, you know, actual cloth. And also, another thing is you actually do have different textures. For example, when you're in water or it's raining, you will have different textures on your clothes and your character's hair and everything. It's these kind of little details, especially on stuff like metal. Like if you look at Ember here and all her metal, it has like water droplets running down it when you're in rain. It's all these little details that they just have in here, which is just, it's so nice. It adds so much. Like it's tiny little things, but it just deepens the game in such a significant way. Also, while we're here, this is one of the other areas. This is the second area that I mentioned earlier, which is a sort of Chinese-inspired area. So we have bamboo forests, and it's kind of misty and hazy, and it's raining, and there's some storks. And still a little bit more about the visuals. Another thing is that you have these, I mean, just the skybox, first of all, is just gorgeous. With, for example, the huge planet just always kind of there in the sky. And then you have like these, just, you see all this stuff really far away, and you can see like that's a place you can go to. You go there later in the game. You can see it from here. So you have like these just gorgeous vistas in a lot of places as well, which are just very nice to look at and make the map feel a bit bigger. Sort of related to that, the game right now, there isn't a sort of day-night cycle or a weather system in the game. You don't have like dynamic weather or dynamic day and night. Instead, each map is specifically lighted and designed with a specific weather and a specific time of day and lighting to always be in a certain map. So this map is sort of in daytime, and the one we were just in for the Chinese-inspired map, but it's sort of cloudy and you have like rain and stuff instead. And then some of the other maps are a little bit more like in the evening time instead. So you don't have dynamic weather and dynamic sort of day and night. Instead, maps are just sort of designed to be in a specific one, which lets them do, you know, somewhat nicer lighting. They can make some of these maps look really nice kind of all of the time because the lighting isn't changing, which I'm pretty okay with. As long as they give us like a decent variety of maps and lighting conditions, I'm pretty okay with that. I like, especially before the beta started and early on in the beta, I was like, I really wish we had a day-night cycle and a weather cycle, but it might not be necessary. Like, I've somewhat come around on the idea that instead, more finely crafting some of these maps for a very specific, like, vibe. And then sort of finally, like, for visual stuff, I guess would be like menus and whatnot, which obviously, I might have opened this a couple times already. So some of the menus maybe have a little bit of like, they could use some tweaking, like for example, the fact that I have to actually like scroll on this menu that I'm hiding somewhat, but I have to scroll on this one to actually get all the buttons to open up or to show. And I've seen some people somewhat like complain that like, I've seen some people say that this menu sort of feels a bit unintuitive and so on, which I can see. But yeah, for just in general, a lot of the UI, however, is if nothing else, it looks very good. I think most of the UI also functions pretty good, no real complaints. If you're familiar with other 3D gacha games, a lot of the menus will probably be quite familiar and not too hard to figure out. But for some reason, gacha games really do they have a thing where some menus are just unintuitive. Like, it just always happens to be so. And it takes getting used to like a specific game's UI system. Also, I'm covering up a whole load of it because I'm over here on the right side. But the menus look nice. They feel nice. They're responsive. The visuals are very nice. This is maybe one of the UIs that I feel could use a little tweaking. It looks really nice. I like the concept. but it can sometimes feel a little tiresome to work through, sort of clicking through the various things. Could maybe be adjusted. One thing for menus, so first of all, I mean, over here, I'm kind of hiding it, but it's EFDB right below me there. This is a little database thing. And this database is incredible. It lists just like everything you could ever want. So it obviously has all of your like tutorials and all the information on like goddamn everything you want. But also, right above me, as you can see, there's a search. So if you want to find something specific, you can search. Let's say I want to find stuff about heat damage. I can just search for it, and it'll bring up the things that mention heat damage. Which is so nice. However, one thing to mention that a lot of people have mentioned, they could adjust the brightness of these menus a little bit, because obviously this sort of nice industrial white is part of the aesthetic for Endfield. It's everywhere. For some of these menus, it's a little too bright. You can see on my face, I am getting like constantly flashbacked. I am so white right now. I am incredibly white because of these menus. When I go out, now I look like a normal human being instead of a vampire like I do now. And also, I'll probably put in a clip or something here of like the loading screen flashbangs. The loading screen is pure white, just because it's a nice lookout point. Flashbang, however, it's the biggest flashbang the game has, and it's, you know, when you're going through like maps and stuff, if you are teleporting around, you will be getting loading screens. You're going to be getting flashbang, but a lot of people have mentioned this, so I assume they're probably going to adjust it to not be so bright, or give you like a dark mode option or something. And I guess then next up we could go into the story and narrative part. You know, at least for everything that we have in the beta. We have a decent amount of like, maybe around 10-ish hours, depending on how fast you're going, but maybe around 10-ish hours is sort of like main story content, like voiced, like fully voiced main story content. Like for the beta, I think story and narrative is actually the weakest aspect at the moment. It's just like so many early gacha games, or rather almost every early gacha game story, it's just kind of mid, like not much happens. And with some of the ways that the game progresses and the story progresses, you kind of get a little lost in the sauce. Like it kind of feels, you kind of forget what happens and stuff. And then you do a whole bunch of stuff in between some of the story quests, so you also kind of just like, all right, yeah, where were we? And the sense of urgency can sometimes be hurt quite a lot by some like level gate and progression stuff, which however feel, at least to me, feel like they're probably beta specific. There's some weird level gates you get in the latter half of the story that feel very artificial and like not finalized, where I imagine it might be a beta thing rather than a full game thing. When it however comes to the presentation of the story, it's actually very good. Like the presentation of everything is really good. It's just the actual substance of like the writing and stuff where the issue is. But it looks great because the game looks great. The voice acting is fantastic. And they've done a really good job with, because it's a gacha game story. So quite often it's just kind of characters standing around and talking to each other, right? But they've done a pretty good job at not making those sections feel as like mind-numbing as they can sometimes. And the way that they do this is by having kind of a bunch of variety in how they're presenting stuff. So they'll have like little mission briefing sort of like calls, like, you know, you kind of have like you have like a group Discord call with your colleagues or something, and you have like little mission briefing things. They'll use those sometimes for dialogue instead of having every character stand around each other. And when you do have characters just kind of standing around and talking to each other, they'll, for example, have the camera move and pan. They'll change their sort of camera shot fairly often and show sort of different perspectives on stuff. And also, just because their character models and whatnot are so good and animations are so good, all of the characters are really expressive. So even when they're just talking, they're usually putting on some kind of expression, or they're moving around in some way, they're posing in some way, and a lot of the characters kind of have like poses and facial expressions that fit their character. It's not just like generic poses that then everyone uses. Some characters will have poses that almost no one else uses, at least at the moment, maybe because of character variety and how many characters we see in the story. But you can even get a feel for characters like temperament and what kind of character they are by just looking at their like body language essentially during like, just talking sections in the story. And then obviously they have, you know, they have some more sort of fancy pre-rendered cutscenes in the game as well, because of course you do, and they look very nice. They also have some in-game cutscenes that don't look as nice as the pre-rendered cutscenes, but still look decent. Some of them could use a little work though. Some of them seem a little unfinished, which they very well might be. It's a beta. They mix up the presentation enough, and also just the sort of fundamentals for stuff like their character models and expressions and things are good enough, where a lot of the even just normal talking sections, like there's enough there for them to not feel just like you're like chewing on wood or something. And at the very least, the writing for stuff like dialogue is not like, at the very least, it's not bad. It's either just kind of normal or good, and sometimes it's quite fun. It heavily benefits from like the very good dubbing that they've done. Obviously, I've mostly gone through and everything in English dub, and for example there, it's fun because you'll meet characters who have different accents. I just had a thought. Where did it go? Oh no. And also, after you sort of finish the main quest for the beta, you also unlock some story quests. You unlock one for Gilberta here. And then you also unlock one for Wolfguard over there. And Gilberta's story quest is first half, kind of boring, generic. But then the second half is pretty nice. You really get to sort of know her more and get some better writing. And then Wolfguard's quest is actually pretty good. And it gets sort of, it gets a little dark. It gets a little gritty, which especially, you know, fans of Arknights will enjoy, because it gets a little bit more serious. Because that is, however, one thing about the story, especially if you're trying to compare it a little bit more to Arknights, it is a far more lighthearted and less depressing story than Arknights is. For good and, you know, bad. There's positives and negatives to it, but it could use, personally, a little bit more greenness, a little bit more darkness. For sure, the actual narrative does need work. And I've seen other people also talk about it, and I've put it also into my feedback, where the actual narrative of things for the story does need work. It just feels a little disjointed, it feels a little unfocused, feels a little directionless. You're kind of not quite sure what you're doing, even though you do sort of have a goal you're working towards, but you kind of forget what you're working towards. It doesn't really guide you in a very good way towards that thing, and gets a little, you know, distracted at times. So yeah, overall for the story and stuff, narrative and whatnot needs some work. Some characters also need some work, but we haven't actually met. I mean, the ones you meet in story, like in main story, are all pretty good. But they also need time to like develop. You'll see them a lot probably in the story, so they also have time to develop. But at least the presentation is so far very good and will probably just get better. So I'm not super worried. And very often with these gacha game stories, they start off mid, and then once they've kind of planted their feet down and they've kind of gotten over like the very basic portions of the story at the start, and they can start doing slightly more interesting stuff when you're sort of not introducing the player to the world and to the characters, then you can do a little bit more. So we'll see how it goes in full release and further down the line, but it would still obviously be nice for the starting story to be a little bit better than it right now is. It could use some work. I guess the final main topic to talk about is the gacha, the gambling part of the gambling game. I don't think I'll get into the weeds of it. I won't get into like all the numbers. I'm not gonna start getting into like math and stuff. This is gonna be my overall like sort of summarized thoughts on it. I think there's good enough videos already on that, on like the details of the system, and people have done like breakdowns of the numbers and everything. So I'll keep it a little bit more general and just what I think of it. So I think early on, there was a lot of doom posting about the gacha because it's out of the usual for these games. So there was kind of doom posting about it, like, oh my god, it's shit, it's horrible, it's doomed, it's so jover. And I think now people have slowly realized that maybe that's not the case. And I mostly from the start have thought that overall the gacha is pretty good. Just the systems of it, the sort of fundamentals of it are like 90%, if 95% just good. Especially I think for like dolphins and actually for free-to-plays, the gacha is probably going to be very good for you as long as you have even the slightest bit of self-control. If you don't, well, I'm gonna be real, I don't have any sympathy for you, okay? Like, that's a skill issue, just straight up. Like, bro, brain diff. Especially compared to sort of, you know, the usual suspects that it automatically gets compared to. Your Genshins, your Star Rails, your Withering Waves, and so on. Your ZZZs. Compared to those, it's a very different system, and it's also very good. It's bad for whales. Straight up, it's bad for whales who are trying to, like, you know, max dupe a character. For whales, not a good deal. However, all of this actually has a massive asterisk, which is that I'm of the belief that you can make pretty much zero inference from a beta for what the actual, like, economy of your gacha rolls is going to be. A beta is, like, completely not representative of what is going to be in the full game. So, if the economy is very good, it's just even better for free-to-plays and dolphins. If the economy is like dog shit, where you barely get any free rolls, then it could be bad. I guess the main things for why I think it is somewhat the, you know, the sort of way character pities are made. So your character pities are generally a bit lower. Like you can guarantee your character in 120. I'm somewhat assuming that you already kind of know how the gacha functions, mostly, but you have a hard guarantee at 120 rolls, but it's one time only, which is the part that's bad for whales, but it's good for dolphins and free-to-plays, because just if you have 120, you can guarantee you're getting your character. You could get them earlier, of course, but 120 is your hard pity. You have a soft pity as well earlier, so when you're going to 120, you'll at the very least get 2 6 stars. And the main criticism people have had, the main issue people have had, is the fact that 120 hard pity doesn't carry over to the next banner. The soft pity carries over, the hard pity doesn't. And that's been the main, like, criticism, which I do somewhat agree with, but I don't think it's as doomium as some people have made it out to be. Partially because right now it seems this could change. This could very well change, but right now it seems not every single new 6-star will be limited. Right now it seems that new characters will also just go into the standard pool, so you can get spooked by them later. I somewhat think they might also have reruns more frequently. But like, yeah, as long as you have like a slightest bit of self-control for saving for something you want, I feel like it will be pretty easy to get all the things that you want as a free-to-play and a dolphin. And then we can kind of get into the fact that yes, there is a weapon gacha. And some people absolutely despise weapon gacha. I'm not a huge fan of weapon gacha either, but I understand why it exists. But also the thing is that in this case, the weapon gacha is effectively insanely generous. First of all, just the rates are pretty good. But the main thing is the fact that for rolling for your character, you will get weapon gacha money. And a decent amount of it, well. The character gacha is not the only source of weapon gacha currency. You also get it from just playing the game in some areas, and probably that will be a thing. You will probably have other sources of it as well. Right now, in the beta, there's actually a weekly source of like extra weapon gacha currency for completely free. Don't have to roll for it, don't have to buy it. It's just you play a game mode and you get the gacha currency. So, and on the topic of just the dupes in general, so both characters and weapons have a dupe system. Obviously, like, oh no, dupes, it's so over. Kind of true, but actually in this case, not true at all. Because so far from what we've seen, actually especially so for like 6-star characters, the dupes are not that significant. The dupes are kind of small. Like the buffs you get from the dupes are not huge. They're not like game-changing amounts of buffs. You genuinely really only need one dupe of a high rarity character for them to be like just a fully complete character. You do not need dupes for either the characters or the weapons, because the weapon dupes, so weapons have 3 skills. They have like 2 stat skills and then they have 1 special skill, which has sort of a special effect. Dupes only upgrade the sort of maximum amount of that 3rd special skill, and you can get like most of that with just like sort of the end game farm, which I haven't really mentioned, but you know, weapons have attachments that give them more stats. Most of the stats you can just get from getting the correct attachment for your weapon. You don't need the dupes for it. So because the dupes aren't very significant, and seemingly characters, not every character is just going to be limited, which means even if you don't have like the usual pity carryover, like the hard pity carryover, I feel like it's not as big of a deal, because this kind of ties in to what I think will be the case sort of long term. Because, okay, gachas are long-term games, and your gacha rolls are a long-term economy. It's not the first month that matters. It's all of the years that you're there for. And what I, at least in its current form, what I see happening with the gacha overall is that over time, over a longer period of time, you will end up with a lot of characters you haven't even necessarily aimed for, but you have them and you can start building teams with them. Maybe they're really good support for something, but you skipped them the first time around, but you happen to get them later. And you'll also probably end up with lots and lots of weapons, because the weapons won't be limited either. You'll have a bunch, you will probably end up over time with loads of signature weapons for characters, which for some of the other games, you really can't say. Like for some of the other games, you have to very specifically aim for, I need this thing and this thing and this thing, and I can only get them right now, or like in 2 months when it reruns or whatever. So I guess sort of closing thoughts for the beta and expectations, I guess, for the future. Overall, like maybe has been somewhat obvious, I'm very impressed and very happy with how the beta is. Not only does it have a lot of potential, a lot of the potential is just already there. It's no longer potential, it's just there. Like a bunch of this just feels incredibly finished. And yet they're probably still going to take many months before they're even going to release, especially if they do a second beta test. We might have a second beta test before even release. After this beta, I am like feeling quite positive about the actual full release. But yeah, I mean, overall, yeah, I'm very satisfied with the beta. I've frankly been multiple times over this like month that I've played, I've just kind of been shocked of like how finished and how good and polished it has been. It's been a little silly. Now it's time for more YouTuber things. What did you think? Do you have strong opinions about the beta? Do you hate it? Do you love it? Did you even get to play it? Did you get to consume it through some other means? Let me know down in the comments. Right over there. Do it. Comment it right now. Give me engagement now. Engagement now.